everyone, and welcome. My name is Kelsey Pierce, and I am a marketing and events specialist here at Origo. And I want to thank everyone for joining Origo's webinar series. We've been hosting these webinars for the past 4 years, and we want to thank everyone for their continued support. In today's discussion, our panelists will share insights on how agencies can modernize their right-of-way process by addressing community, legal, and data challenges. Now, before we get started, I did want to let you know that the webinar is recorded and we will provide all registered participants with a recording along with the slides. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit them via the Q&A chat box and we will answer your questions at the end of the presentation. If we don't answer your question during the available time, we will follow up with you via email. And joining us today, we have our VP of Marketing, Richard Kramer, who will be moderating today's session. Richard, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Kelsey. Great to be here.
Now, I'm really excited to introduce our panel of experts. Joining us today, we have Craig Reynoldson, the Chief of Right-of-Way at Nevada DOT. Craig began his career in real estate appraisal in Southern California before moving to Las Vegas in the late 90s. In 2008, he became the Appraisal Compliance Investigator for the Nevada Real Estate Division. And in 2015, he joined Nevada DOT, where he now serves as Chief Right-of-Way Agent. Craig, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Next, we have Aaron Estes. Aaron is the right-of-way professional with over 25 years of experience in land acquisition and landman work. He holds 4 real estate licenses, an MBA, and holds an SRWA designation. Aaron has led projects across energy, telecom, and infrastructure, including pipelines, transmission lines, roadways, and fiber networks. He has deep experience working with local, state, and federal agencies like the Bureau of Land Management, Department of Transportation, National Park Service, and Environmental Protection Agency to ensure regulatory compliance. Aaron is also a published writer and is passionate about industry excellence and continuing education. Aaron, thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here today.
And finally, we have Tim Copeland. Tim is a practice leader and hands-on program manager with nearly 25 years of experience in property rights acquisition and managing infrastructure projects, including roadways, utilities, pipelines, and trails. As city real estate agent for Virginia Beach, he leads a team overseeing all city and state acquisitions, base realignment and closure committee related purchases, and land disposition processes. As a certified general real estate appraiser, Tim regularly presents to City Council and provides expert witness testimony in condemnation cases. Tim is a past president of the Old Dominion chapter of the International Right-of-Way Association and currently serves as his chapter's education chair. Tim, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Kelsey.
And before we get started with the discussion, we're going to launch a quick poll. This just kind of gives us an idea of who's in our audience today. So if you would like to choose which option best describes your organization, whether that be roads and bridges, water, wastewater, transit rail, electric grid, green energy, or something other than that.
Yeah, we'd just like to see who's in our audience. If you're with the city Public Works Department does multiple of these, just pick the one that maybe you deal with the most. Sometimes there's overlap.
And just give it a few more moments. Alrighty, and then we're just about there. Alrighty, that gives us about 60%. Whoops.
Oh.
There we go. All right, so we've got a lot of roads and bridges in our audiences today.
Yeah, that's expected. I'm wondering if the others were, multiple categories. That's why they picked it. Or it could be folks from our consultant community and that kind of thing as well. Yeah. All right.
Perfect. And then we have one more poll question right after this, which just basically describes your role. So which role kind of fits you the best? Are you more project management, capital planning and finance, engineering, consulting, real estate or right of way, or do you fall with something else. And this just kind of gives our speakers an idea of how to direct it best to you, making sure we really tailor your experience. Alrighty. Just a few more seconds. Perfect. All right, so we've got about project manager and engineers about the same, and then a lot of in real estate and right of way. Perfect.
I think that's roughly the breakdown I think we had at our last right of way webinar. So, we obviously broadcast and market the webinar mainly to right of way folks, but we do stuff all the way along the capital life cycle. So we usually have folks from engineering or finance and planning coming in as well. So glad to have you folks here as well.
Awesome. And with that, I will hand it over to Richard so that we can get started.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey. And a big welcome from me to everybody in the audience. Thanks so much for joining us. As I was just saying, I enjoy doing webinars and talking about right of way and the associated topics with our customers, everything from land acquisition, managing the actual property, the appraisal process, and really how those things sort of intersect with the rest of the capital program life cycle, if you like, and just in running a public agency in general. And we've been offering right-of-way solutions for about a decade now, but I always say I don't think right-of-way gets enough attention in the architect, engineering, construction world. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion where our panelists are going to share their knowledge and their stories when it comes to managing right-of-way and right-of-way projects. So we'll talk about, as you can see on the screen there, some of the latest trends and challenges, community engagement, which is always a super important topic, and then how to build the right team for your agency's success. So let's just start by sort of setting the groundwork and chat maybe some about the big picture issues that we have. So I'd like to ask each panelist just for a quick overview of right-of-way at their agency. Or Aaron, in your case, your clients, of course, and talk a little bit about some of the major initiatives that you have going on right now. So I'll start with Craig, who's from Nevada DOT, as we said. Craig, what's happening in Nevada?
Thank you. So a little bit about our structure. Our right-of-way division here in the state consists of a right-of-way engineering section. We have an appraisal section, and we're a centrally located department. So as far as right-of-way is concerned, we do have a satellite office in Las Vegas with very few people for our right-of-way utilities folks. But so we have our engineering. We do the right-of-way plans under this umbrella of right-of-way. We have an appraisal review department. We have permits for headquarters. We have our utility section. We have a acquisition section and negotiations. And then you mentioned major initiative. The department didn't usually have a property management section, but when I came on board, it was one of my major initiatives, and it took us about 2 years, and we developed a property management team. So,
where were the property stuff being handled before that? Was it just sort of under a general right-of-way?
Yeah, so our right-of-way agents would just cover the property management. There wasn't a lot of focus on property management, but we realized over time that we needed to take and manage the properties a little bit better. So it was a huge milestone that we met last year. So
yeah, No, makes sense. Very much so. So, Aaron, why don't you tell us a little bit a bit more about what you do and maybe how you, as a consultant, sort of see the world of right of way for your clients?
Sure. Actually, most of the time when I'm doing my work, I'll be reaching out to these to try and get permits, and we're trying to get permission to help our clients do whatever it might be. I'll give you a great example. I'm working currently with Coversource Energy, which is mainly out of the Eastern Mass, well, actually more, yeah, Eastern Mass, Connecticut area. We're working on something called the GSEP project, the Greater Cambridge Energy Project.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a total of about 5 miles of brand new underground high power energy lines. And we, because it's 5 miles and it's actually about 3 or 4 different routes of smaller, not even mile long lines, I'm having to deal with several different municipalities and entities and so forth. So, like, for example, this week alone, I've met with Harvard University, I've met with MIT University, I've met with Matimco, which happens to be the business real estate aspect of MIT. I've had to meet with a senator because in the state of Massachusetts, anytime you cross the state of a state-owned property, you actually have to change their constitution to give you the right to do to have a right-of-way or exchange any kind of property, and that's called Article 97. We're going through a riverbed with an HDD, a directional drill, and so that's requiring us to talk to several different people. We're dealing with MassDOT, Massachusetts Department of Transportation, MBTA, that's the subpart of MassDOT that handles all the train systems. I've had to meet with them also. And then, of course, just personal landowners, people that were crossing their property and they own land, and we're negotiating purchasing a right-of-way to go across there. So when it comes to what is required by us doing our work, it can be anything and everything. Like I said, we're meeting with senators, we're meeting with universities, we're meeting with cities. We have to get DOLs on grant of location from several of the cities in that area that will allow us to put the right of way in the street. And then we even go beyond that, where we have to reach out to people who already have utilities or equipment within the street area, and we have to negotiate and sometimes move them over so we can squeeze in, or even if it's the fact that they have leftover abandoned equipment. So when it comes to dealing with right-of-way, we have to encompass all that and negotiate and work with them and obtain rights and obtain everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I was talking to a right-of-way director once, and she said something very simple, which always stuck with me. She said, "Right-of-way is a conversation." That was it. That was her view of the world. So what you're talking about is engaging the right people in the process. I think is huge. Is huge for right away. So thank you for that. Tim, on to you. Tim is from Virginia Beach, where we were just out there for there's a big organization I'm sure many of our audience members know, which is the International Right of Way Association, and that their big conference, annual conference, was just held in Virginia Beach. So, Tim, really happy to have you here. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in Virginia Beach?
Absolutely, Richard. Thank you. Certainly glad to host the IRWA back in early June. But as far as my office, Craig, to your point, we somewhat operate like a mini DOT. So in Virginia, as part of the local public assistance, we do all of the functions of the Virginia Department of Transportation. So we do the right-of-way acquisition, we do relocation, we do property management. We are able as a city to self-perform all of those functions that the Virginia Department of Transportation does when it does a project. And so we ultimately have to answer to VDOT and to FHWA, but it's we have a lot of leeway, in how we manage our projects. So, we have engineering, we have everything in house. Don't use a lot of consultants. We do for appraisal work primarily, but my staff of 11, we currently have probably 600 acquisitions on the books to perform in the next couple of years. And so, beyond just right of way, we do all of the acquisition and disposition of real estate for the city. And it's a very diverse city. I mean, with the Atlantic Ocean, the Chesapeake Bay, we have rural areas, we have urban areas. So it's been quite a challenge coming. I came from a strictly right-of-way background, from a linear infrastructure background, into now an organization where we do a lot of real estate in addition to the right-of-way. So, but building a staff, building that team, and getting things done. So, yeah, it's exciting. Great place to be, and we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because Craig mentioned the same thing. I feel I've seen the same thing, that like right of way and property management have sort of been consolidated. That seems to be the trend. They're consolidating more in most of the agencies that we talk to. Whereas maybe 15 years ago it was two separate things. So interesting to hear that as well. So let's move on. Let's talk about when you're starting a big right-of-way project, although some of this might apply to just building a department as well. I wanted to, chat about, for our audience, what are some of the things you really need to think about before you're embarking on that? What are the foundations for success? I mentioned IRWA before, and one article they do a magazine, which I think is just called Right of Way magazine. It's free online. I would check it out if you're in the space. And I just remember reading an article about success, and the whole article was really around stakeholders and managing people and all that kind of stuff, which I mentioned a little while ago. So I want to ask Aaron, when you're working through a new initiative, what are some of those big ticket items that you think about first in order to lay that groundwork for success?
Well, honestly, when we get a big project, the first thing we look about is who the involved parties are going to be, and mainly because we're going to have some parties that are going to be more difficult than others to work with. Perfect example was a job I worked down in Texas for Kinder Morgan. We were doing a natural gas line coming across 3 different counties, Trinity, Houston, and Polk County. And in the middle of the route, we found that there was an Indian nation. And you cannot, basically, that's the worst case scenario to work with. And I mean that mainly because it's dealing with its own entity, its own country, to say, for lack of better words. You have no eminent domain rights on them. They never, almost 100% never, give you a permanent right of way. They can only give you a lease. And as you can imagine, when you're doing that, that can be very shaky for investors or shaky for people, because at any point, if that lease is broken or there's an issue, it can cause the entire pipeline to become useless. So I would say the main thing is you want to get everyone who's going to be a stakeholder moving forward and look at that as the number one priority, because that will basically tell the engineers where they need to change the route. That will also let people know how long the project will take, because if you're going through certain government entities or you're going through certain people, large companies, and they have a process that takes at least 2 years to go through, then you know what kind of staffing you're going to need long term, and what kind of financial obligation is going to be moving forward. So all these play in, and normally what you have is you have what's called a kickoff meeting, where you bring in engineering, you bring in survey, you bring in right of way, you bring in all the parties that are part of the project, so that you can actually talk about what's going on. And several of these meetings are very key, and that sometimes kickoff meeting will stall the project for anywhere from 3 to 6 months, just by the fact that once you get everyone together, you're able to look and see the amount of problems that are happening. From my stance, I sat down on one meeting for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and the very first meeting, we sat down and I sat next to the engineer and I said, whoever designed this doesn't know what they're doing. And I didn't know she was the engineer who had designed it. So he was just kind of like, I didn't know what they were doing. And she was like, what do you mean? And I said, well, you're going through 3 cemeteries. You're going through the middle of a military base. You've got this and this. And because in her mind, she thought, oh, well, this is a public utility. We have eminent domain. We can go wherever we want. And it's like, no, it's just like anything, you have your restrictions and you have your holdback. So again, that was one of the things where then shortly thereafter, they sat down and they did another kickoff meeting a month later, because they had to sit down with right of way. The right of way could tell them to avoid everything that they were doing. And additionally, there was concerns about the number of turns and bends and PIs. Sorry for those who don't know, that pressure increase put into a pipe. And when you put every time you put a bend in, it increases the pressure and shortens the distance between points that you can actually have what's called compressor stations. And compressor stations build up the pressure so it can shoot up the pipe. And so if we put more bends in it, you're moving a compressor station to a totally different location. So all these play in on the very first thing. So all these get, again, it's realizing, getting everyone's input on this, and also getting the idea of who you're going to be dealing with in the future. And that helps set the scope and the timeline of what's actually going to happen during this project.
Yeah, you hit on some so we mentioned the people again. That's something that keeps coming up, and then just that community piece, which is so important. And then everything's, right away is kind of complicated. Everything's is underpinned by this legal framework or legal structure that you have to operate within, and can't really color outside the lines there, I don't think. So thank you, Tim. What do you think? Do you approach that in a similar way? Are there other things you think about when setting up for success?
Richard's very similar. I mean, your slide is spot on, right? So start early, and we're fortunate in that all of the aspects of our projects are pretty much contained in-house. So when a project is in the concept stage, it gets assigned to one of my agents. They start reviewing plans at 30%, 60%, 90%. So they're finding these things that, as Aaron said, that, a lot of times the design is what it is, right? And engineers love straight lines. And so every now and then you have to bend a line or move an easement or move a right-of-way line to avoid conflict. And, so it's nice having this input from the very beginning. We're brought in at the community information meeting stage. So we get to go out and meet with the public, talk about right-of-way, talk about proposed acquisitions. So yes, you can't start early enough. And then, you talk about the legal challenges and title, and kind of just to mix those. In Virginia, we've had legislation in the past couple of years that has put very onerous title requirements on acquisitions, and, having to give 60-year titles and all of the documents that pertain in that chain of title. And it just becomes very, very voluminous when you start making an offer package where you've got 4 inches of title documents. But if you make a misstep in there, then you're subject to, having your certificates, having your stuff invalidated. But yeah, so it's, and then we work across the different teams, right? We work well with engineering, and that's one of the things that I wanted to do when I came to the city, was reestablish my office's relationship with engineering, with our legal office. Our city attorneys, our real estate attorneys are in the same building as I am, so we have great back and forth. And you get in, you do your title work, you find your problem children, right? You find your ones that are going to take longer to convey, your air properties, your trust, churches, those roadblocks, and you kind of build that into your schedule. And then, as you say at the end, right, you just got to be flexible. And so because something's going to change. And so we just try to minimize the impacts of those changes, and try to keep everything on schedule.
Yeah, thanks. Craig, over to you. What do you think setting up success in the beginning looks like?
Yeah, I mean, everything that Aaron and Tim have said have been pretty much the same as what I might say. I think early is definitely making successful, but both of them mentioned, location. Location is important when they're scoping projects and start off with the design. The location, and Nevada, I know most everybody thinks of Las Vegas when you say Nevada, but there's different regions in Nevada, and those different communities are impacted differently, right? And rural to downtown, we had a recent project that was waiting on the rod, and understanding how that impacts the communities down there is super important. So that project failed and didn't move forward because of the amount of acquisition and relocation and the impacts to the communities until we can get a better plan. But Aaron mentioned, getting together. We have and Tim mentioned 30, 60, 90. We have all of those same reviews, and at 60%, we have either a pre-right of way setting where we set the right of way, and if there's any changes to that, it can impact the schedule, and so it's made very aware and memorialized as such, so that we're setting it. To me, that's helping the success of the right of way, and helping the whole department understand what we're setting. If there's deviations, this is going to impact schedule, which is time, which we all know. So being ready, having a solid design, not deviating to the extent, and knowing who we're acquiring or relocating. Some of those individuals, sophisticated or not, can extend that project. So anyway, that's about all.
No, that's good. And I like the other thing you said, which I think is good, is have a plan to communicate. Know what when things go off track, like don't be surprised, which I think is really good as well. Okay, we have another poll. Kelsey, you want to explain the poll?
Yeah, we just really want to understand where your primary challenges lie with your current right-of-way process. So is it more within, the confusing legal pathways, public resistance or misinformation? So in communicating with your community, is it internal communications between the teams internally, slow acquisition process, or legal and community timelines not aligned? Craig was just mentioning about how sometimes things get off track, but how do we communicate that and how do we plan for that? So we just really want to get an idea of what your current challenges are, just so that our speakers can kind of speak a little bit more in relation to that.
Yeah, and you can pick more than one.
Yes.
You can pick all five if you really have to. We'll understand. All right, let's just wait for a few more responses. Thank you, folks.
few more.
They're coming in. I see them.
Yeah.
All right.
Perfect. Wow. Kind of spread across the board almost. But definitely with internal communication and slow acquisition processes taking the lead.
Taking the lead, but pretty even. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think every organization struggles with internal communication like that. But yeah, it's interesting that that's higher to me than, say, the public resistance, although there's some in both of there. All right, well, that's good. It's something possibly the agency can move the needle on internally. So we've mentioned community engagement and legal already. So let's dive in a little bit and talk about the wrinkles in the process there. We had a webinar a few years ago. Actually, it wasn't about right of way. It was actually a general building a public agency high performing team type webinar. But we had a head of a DOT on the webinar. I don't want to mention his name, but he's well regarded in the DOT space. And I didn't know this, but he actually started talking about how he'd been with the agency for 30 years, risen to director. But at some point early on, he was a right-of-way agent. And I don't know if it was the first thing he did or the second thing or what have you, but he actually mentioned in that webinar that that was the best job he ever had at the agency because it taught him he basically said, taught him everything he needed to know about how to deal with people and deal with the public. And he used to have to go around and literally knock on people's doors. This was, back in the day before the internet and whatnot. And it said it gave him it sort of, framed his view of what a DOT should be doing for the rest of his career there, which I thought was fascinating. So I'd like to get the audience's, the panel's views on this idea of engaging with the community on right-of-way initiatives and some of the hiccups and what the best practices are. So, Tim, I'm going to start with you. Tell us how you approach this communication, visibility with the public, that kind of thing, in Virginia Beach.
So Richard, as I mentioned previously, I mean, we are involved early on with what we call community information meetings. So before we go to the formal public hearing process, we will put together, our city, our consultants will put together a number of public meetings to gather input on a project and solicit feedback. The beautiful thing is, it kind of shifted after, when COVID came along and we couldn't have meetings, public meetings, right? A lot of this went online. Which has been good with making it available and more information available to a broader number of people. But those in-person meetings are very valuable, to us and to our design team because we get a chance to make that initial contact with the property owners. They're not all going to show up. They're never going to all show up. But it's nice to make that connection. And then as your staff, as your agents start working a project, they have a familiar face. And so, as one person goes, so they can talk to their neighbors and then they talk to their neighbors. And it just kind of helps, bridge that, I won't say mistrust, but maybe that resistance to a project that's in your backyard, in your front yard. So we do that up front. Then we do go through the formal public hearing processes, both in the community and then as part of our council actions in order to authorize right-of-way and if necessary authorize condemnation for projects. So we feel like we do a good job of engaging the public. I'm sure it can always be better. But I think over the years, I've seen it just ramp up and be a significant factor in how successful our projects can be.
Yeah, thanks. It's definitely since the pandemic, what we're seeing with a lot of our customers is sort of a hybrid model. They're still doing the in-person town halls. They're still doing street surveys on the actual street, for example, but they're incorporating some kind of and that, so we have a solution for community engagement digitally as well. But we built that based on this need that I think came from the COVID pandemic, that folks weren't available to meet in person. So now we're seeing sort of a hybrid. People are doing multiple ways and then joining that feedback together. Craig, what about so at Nevada DOT? You have projects, I assume, sort of all over the state. It's a bigger geographic area. What kind of challenges and mitigations do you have around engaging the community?
Sure. So with Nevada DOT, we have a public outreach team. And our project managers, so when we're beginning that process, and we're going to begin the environmental process, as much as right-of-way is involved, considering the Uniform Act, we're really careful about right-of-way and getting involved too early. We don't want to give a sense that we're going to be acquiring your property, or those have become some legal challenges, right? So before a ROD has been issued, we kind of just sit, we understand, we watch, we provide all the information on what acquisition process looks like, and how that offer works and all of that information. But we do have our project managers, as well as our public information officers. They do a lot of the public outreach and invite when it's necessary. So during that beginning stages, we provide information, but we don't meet with the public until we've got to that point of the environmental status, so that we can engage and get a little closer involved with the community and understand. So,
yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, you want to have all your ducks in a row before you engage the public, I guess. That makes perfect sense.
They can tell us, well, we're being impacted, and some have even said that we've already hurt their property in an inverse condemnation case. So we're real careful not to get too involved too early until it's time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. All right, and Aaron, I'm curious if in your role, do your services sort of go into the community engagement part? Is it something you hear your owner clients talking about?
Yeah, actually, it's probably one of the biggest parts of being a right-of-way agent is we still knock doors, even with the internet nowadays. We still go on people's properties and talk at them. I always crack a joke about how when I married my wife, I told her sometimes I get shot at when I go on people's properties, and or I get yelled at, or I get thrown out, or whatever it is. You're dealing with you're dealing with everyone and anyone, and and this is not to say it's a horrible job. It's a great job, and it's the reason I've been doing it for over 25 years. I love it. And the old joke is, because I get asked, well, it's terrible. If you get shot at, that's horrible. I said, well, when you hear the shot, it means you missed. And if you didn't miss, well, then it really doesn't matter at that point. And like anything, I think there's a balance to it, because in Virginia, I was working on the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. And the Atlantic Coast Pipeline was probably, Dominion had decided to try and reinvent the wheel. And what they did was they decided to bring the community in, and they held tons of town halls, and they met with tons of people, and they brought the engineers in instead of leaving it the right of way, because as right of way people, we learn how to say no gracefully and tell people we can't do that. And engineers would be approached by the landowner going, hey, can you move this over here and can you do this? And they'd be like, because they wanted to, please people, they were like, yeah, we can look at that. And pretty soon, by the fourth or fifth town hall meeting, we had 156 changes. And again, like I said, every time you put a PI in it costs money and it's a big change. And if not many people have heard of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, it's because it got shut down. What happened was it was just a huge disaster that just never happened. Hundreds of millions of dollars went into it. It's probably one of the reasons the Dominion is struggling as much as it is right now. And it is the reason that the community fought so hard and so badly against it, that Virginia, I think it's like an average of anywhere from $4 to $8 a month overall increase on their utility bill, of energy bill. It was because the community had come together to shut down the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, even though it was for their own good, even though it was to bring more electricity at a better rate and a better price. So there's a certain balance that needs to be done. And absolutely, you need to involve the community, but there needs to be a limit to the involvement in that community. And what I mean by that is, whenever I have a problem or an issue with a customer or a client of mine, and they go, well, we want this and we think this and we do this, and they're the client, we need to give them what they want, but at the same point, we need to balance what they want. It's like when you go to the doctor and you go to the doctor, you say, hey, what's the matter? And he tells you what's the matter and what you need to do, and you try to negotiate with the doctor. It's not really how it works. It came to us because we're specialists. It came to us because we specialize in what you're asking us to do. So you need to trust us as someone who's done this. And again, projects can go really sideways, really fast if the client doesn't listen to what you're telling them. And in a lot of ways, when you're dealing with the public will come out and fight. And a lot of times people will be afraid of public opinion going up against them. And it is an issue where you have to appease the public a little bit, but you also have to at the same time have to realize that you can't give the public what they want all the time, because the public will. You'd be surprised how many times you'll go and you'll say, hey, we're going to be putting an energy pole on your property, or we're going to be going through your property, and they'll say, well, I don't want it on my property, put it on my neighbor's property. And I'll say, but this is to give electricity to everyone. He goes, well, I want the electricity, I just don't want it on my property.
Right.
And that does cause that's kind of my experience with all landowners. They want the benefit, but they don't want the downside, and that's anybody. I get that, but it is finding a balance. It is finding a clear understanding of trying to involve the public without letting the public take the reins and try and run it into the ground, which is what they did with the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. In my opinion, there might be some more information that people would dig up, but the honest truth is that with the FERC project, Federal Energy Regulation Commission project, and we had the right to proceed. We had the senators, we had the government, we had everyone on board, but because Dominion cared so much about public opinion and tried to reroute so many times and tried to make everyone happy, they didn't make anybody happy, and then they ended up linking the project because it just blew up on them. And so again, this is where the planning with the community and bringing them in has to be with some sort of intelligence to it. Now, you can't expect people who don't know the idea, the understanding of a project, to be able to speak intelligently to you about it. So it's your job as a right-of-way agent to sit there and speak with them and say, hey, you know what? Let me ask you something. You understand exactly what's going to be coming across the project, coming across the property. And they'll say, no, I imagine it's going to be this, and it's going to cause cancer, and it's going to kill all my cows, and blah, blah, blah. and you have to sit down and you have to hold their hand and walk them through it. But at the same time, you cannot let them put you off. I hate to say it, but I've always said you can't trust landowners. Now that's not me saying anything like they're bad people. They're good people, but you have to do what's best for your project at the time. And I'll give you a perfect example. We were building a line, and I'll make this quick. We were building a line, and we were coming close to this landowner's field. And he said, "Hey, can you move it over into the woods?" And we said, "Well, that's going to cut down more trees. It's going to be a lot more, but we'll work with you." And we tried. So we moved it a little bit over, and we ended up going through that wood section. And so we redesigned it. We got the new plat and the new design. We came to him. And then he turned around and he said, "You know what? Well," he goes, "well, now I want you to pay me more money." And I said, "Why?" "We did what you asked." And he said, "Because over there, that just happens to be an old slave graveyard." And and he goes, "And I'll call everyone. I'll call CNN. I'll call Fox. I'll call everyone and tell them how your pipeline is going to go through a slave graveyard and you don't care." And it's one of those where it's a perfect example of being taken advantage by the public. And how you have to have a balance in between.
Yeah, agree completely. It's a fine line to walk, and it may be a little unusual in engineering to think so much about psychology and messaging and how you talk to people, but this is the one area where I think you have to do it. It's fascinating. So, all right. So moving on, we've got two more quick topics, folks. And I'm seeing folks in the audience, please keep sending your questions in. We're seeing them coming in. And we'll hopefully have some time at the end for our panelists to get to some of those. So let's talk a little bit about team structure at an agency. This has come up a number of times. So panel, don't feel like you need to repeat anything you've said already. And I'll start with Craig. I mean, you made that interesting comment right at the beginning, Craig, about having a property function within your right-of-way group. Anything else? There's obviously there's the engagement side. There's technology. Any other things that you've seen change at your agency in terms of structure or the kind of people that you need in these functions?
Well, technology, of course, and it seems like it advances daily, right? And one of the things about technology that has been super helpful is with putting technology into the right-of-way division and the workflows, so to speak, building those workflows in Masterworks, being able to identify each section in a workflow and the specific work that they do, capturing all of building the parcels and grouping that and packaging it as it moves through those roles and through the module, has really identified for us some inefficiencies. It's made it much more efficient. It's kind of, in a negative way, it's kind of taken some people out of it, but where they feel like I don't have a job anymore, but there's always work to do. But no, technology definitely, AI, the way it's coming together and the things that it can do, we're touching on some of that stuff now in our right of way, and how that may be able to help first just with title research and things like that. So I'm learning a lot, so I don't want to talk too much about it, but the biggest, I think, modernization has been we didn't have any kind of software before or any kind of platform for moving it was all paper. And so that's been a huge effort for us. And it's been a couple of years in the making, but we're excited to see the end pretty soon. So.
Awesome, thanks. I'm going to go to Tim next. Tim, anything you'd like to add on either team structure, the kind of folks you need in the team, or on the technology side?
Richard, I mean, it hasn't changed a lot. I mean, really, in the 25 years, I mean, it's still, and I think you started it off, by talking about right away being a conversation process, right? So that technology hasn't changed. And, there are ways to track projects. There are, and, as Craig has talked about managing workflows and finding efficiencies. But no real changes in the structure of what we do. And we proved, and we go back to the pandemic, we proved that we could still acquire right of way in the middle of a pandemic by changing our practices. But we've slowly seen, and VDOT adopted the policy during COVID of mailing out offers. Prior to that, it was pulling teeth to get them to allow you to mail out an offer. So we're seeing it now come back, as you said, a mix, but still that human factor, and that's what I don't want to lose sight of. But the technology's there, especially on the visualization, and kind of tying that to your public engagements to be able to show what the power line's going to look like, what the view shed is going to be, before you build anything. Before overlaying plans on roadway plans on top of GIS, on aerials, so those have been great enhancements. But overall it's still a people game, and we still need good people. So I'm a little bit old school there, but we're getting there and moving into using technology as best we can.
Yep. Start with the people. Absolutely. So we have about 10 minutes left. Aaron, I'll hand over to you just for 1 minute quickly. Anything, and then we'll move on to audience questions. Anything else you'd like to add just about team structure or technology?
I'm sure. I wrote an article this last year about will right away ever join the remote remote worker. And it does cover a lot more in that. So if people want my opinion on that, it is kind of a hybrid deal. I do believe that we are changing and we have to keep up with it, but that's kind of it.
Yeah, awesome. So as I said, we've seen audience questions come in. Kelsey, you want to take some of those and just ask our panel, and panel, feel free to jump in on any question that you feel is appropriate for you.
Yeah, of course. We have one question that came in. They are wondering what specific design elements are needed to start developing right-of-way plans, and what specific strategies does your organization use to begin those plans as soon as possible? So how do you start it, and how do you kind of get that off the ground running as quickly as possible?
I could jump in if you want. So I it might be repetitive, but the level of design that we typically start with from the designers is 60. It's not that we're not looking at them, but 60 is usually where environmental is able to provide some sort of clearance or an idea of a categorical exclusion or something like that. So we usually start at 60s because 60s look very similar to 90s. So and we set the right of way, like I said before, and it's documented, station offsets in a memo describing permanent easements, temporary and fee. It is specific about the purpose and need, and it really is a good way to set that and to begin the development. In our right-of-way survey services, folks do the right-of-way mapping and do the legal descriptions. It's very efficient. Seems to work good. Any changes, then we can also delete or amend, depending. But hope that was helpful.
Yes, and then we have one more. With regards to team structures, are appraisals typically conducted within the right-of-way team if done in-house, or is that something that is outsourced?
So Kelsey, I mean, I'll start. It can be done both ways. When I was a consultant, we had a staff of appraisers, and we thought it was going to be easier to manage that process without having to outsource the appraisals. But I quickly found that it wasn't the best way, because it's keeping them busy was always going to be a challenge. And so really what I'm seeing more in the industry, even across DOT and across my office, is we outsource all of our appraisals. We have the ability to keep them in-house. I'm a reviewer as well, so I can review appraisals. But it's it's just been simpler to make that separate of our office, and then just have my right-of-way project managers, manage the consultant process. So again, it's they're getting to be fewer and fewer of us that do eminent domain appraising, and that becomes a challenge in and of itself. So it's a luxury that if you have it, it's great, but it's I think it's a luxury that few of us can afford any longer.
Yeah, thank you for your response. I think that's very helpful to know. With that, we have time for one more. What communication strategies have helped you build trust within property owners during the public acquisitions?
I can jump in on that real quick if you want. The honest truth is that you, when it comes to acquisition with property owners, it's being truthful, and it's also keeping them informed. That's the most important thing you can do. If you find out that there's going to be a change on the property, you want to reach out immediately and tell them, hey, this is happening. We want to try and get ahead of this and fix this, and move forward. And a lot of times, property owners just they feel sometimes powerless when you come in, because this is their home, this is their property, you're taking from them, and they feel like they have no option. And because of that, you want to make sure that it's done as hand in hand as possible, and that they understand that every step of the way you're saying, hey, I know I haven't talked in 2 weeks, but it's because we're talking to engineering and they're redesigning, or hey, we might have survey come out and get another reading in the next 2 days. Is that okay? So it's again boiling down to having the proper communication and the proper conversation with everyone. Real quick, they asked about the graveyard. We moved back to the guy's house again on that one. Sorry, just answering that question too.
Perfect. Awesome. And with that, we are right at time. I wanted to thank you all for joining our webinar today. Sorry, I'm hearing some audio in the background. The recordings this is recorded and will be shared with all of the participants in today's webinar, as well as anyone who registered the recording, as well as the slides. And if we didn't get to your question today, we will send you an email answering your question. But thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Thank you.